Hello there, people of the internet. I am out here with my star model BM. This right here is Spanish surplus, and I've used this on the channel plenty of times. But anytime I bring out a handgun, well, not every single time, but very often I'll bring out a handgun like this. Then I'll make my video, I'll talk about what it is that I'm talking about, and we'll have a good time. And then whenever I spend my rounds downrange, I'll be like, alright, thanks for watching, yada yada yada, outro, and I'll go like this. And then I have some people in the comments yelling at me, and they're like, hey, you can't drop your slide like that. It will damage the firearm. And I continue to do it. And more often than not, like, I've gotten probably, I don't know, 24 or so comments over my time of this YouTube channel of people telling me not to drop the slide like this because it will damage the firearm. And there is some truth to that. There is some relative information to what is being said that does hold true. However, it's not quite to the extent that people assume it to be. I will say, do as I say, not as I do, and it's probably not a good idea for you to just drop the slide on an empty chamber with a handgun. What you should do, technically speaking, I'm going to go ahead and give this right now. It's probably not something I'm going to do, but you should do, hold your slide release down, pull your slide back, let it go forward, and that will drop the slide without slamming it down. Now, whenever I talk to people, they're like, well, it cycles so fast anyway whenever it is firing, so it shouldn't be a problem at all. Well, whenever the slide is cycling upon firing, it is stripping a cartridge from the magazine and loading it into the chamber. And a significant amount of energy from the slide moving forward is transferred into doing that task, and so it doesn't hit with near the amount of authority that it does if you drop it on an empty chamber. Now, with something like this, it doesn't really matter. However, whenever you get into things that are more custom, things that are more higher end, and you start getting into handguns that have a very delicately fine-tuned, fine-balanced trigger system in it, like for example, less than a pound trigger system in some kind of single-action hammer-fired firearm, that is where you can start to really see some damage on the firearm. Whenever you drop the slide and it does not have the energy transferred to the magazine being stripped of a round and loaded into the chamber, that plays hell. That plays absolute hell upon the firing mechanism of that firearm. It just has way more energy being transferred onto the firearm than it's supposed to. And as a result, over time of repeatedly doing this, if you have yourself a firing system that is very fine-tuned, you can knock it out of balance or peen it or do some kind of damage to it that will either very much diminish the fine-tuning in that system and give you a much worse trigger pull, or worst case scenario, stop that system from functioning altogether, and you'll have some kind of system or some kind of malfunction to where the hammer will just fall or the striker will just fall. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say right now that striker systems and hammer systems are two completely different systems, and dropping the slide on a striker fire system is a lot less painful than on a hammer fire system. However, both systems have some kind of locking system, unless it's a straight blowback design, in which case drop away, especially if you have a 5-pound trigger. But both cases are going to have some kind of locking system. If they have some kind of locking system, then over time it will actually peen that locking system and do damage to the locking system, and that's definitely not something that you want either. However, it will definitely damage the firing system way sooner than the locking system. Whenever you have a fine-tuned handgun that has an extremely light trigger pull, all of the interconnecting surfaces are like precisely on top of each other, exactly where they need to be. Well, whenever you slam this system down with more force than what it's designed to, just over time, that will knock it off balance, and it will no longer be exactly where it needs to be. Now, whenever you have yourself, I'm sure there's going to be some people out there saying, I have this XYZ gun and I slam it down all the time, no problem. I'm willing to bet that you don't have a 1/2-pound trigger inside of that thing either. Whenever you have yourself something like this, I think this right here, if I had to make a bet, I'd say probably about a 4-pound trigger pull. I've never actually tested it. Let me go ahead and test that right now. Yeah, I'd say around 3.5, 4 pounds, rough estimations. Well, dropping the slide on something like this, where you have, you know, several, well, you have a lot of surface engagement with that sear, which is why you have yourself a very heavy trigger pull, because you gotta bypass that surface engagement in order for that to drop. That's what makes a trigger pull, you know, so heavy. And the amount of spring tension that is on that sear pushing it into the surface that you're trying to pull. I'm not going to go into the mechanisms of why a trigger is light or is heavy, but whenever you have a lot of surface area and a lot of you just have a lot of meat to play with, then you can get away with just dropping the slide on something like that. But you can't necessarily do that with fine-tuned triggers, and that is where the issues come in. Now, I am a poor guy. I do not have money. And as a result, I don't have any custom firearms. You'll notice that a lot of my stuff I have on my channel is either dirt cheap or military surplus, and as a result, most of the time the triggers are basically going to suck. I don't think I have a single firearm in my collection that doesn't have, well, that has a trigger that is under 2 pounds, especially my handguns. I think my lightest weight handgun is probably my 1911, and even then, that's still a 2.5 pound trigger. And I'm not worried about dropping the slide on that. Now, if I had like a custom 1911, like some kind of high-end custom 1911, insert your pick of hammer fire system here, you know, if you don't want to use the 1911 as an example, and I had a trigger that was a 1/2 pound designed for like shooting match level groups, then dropping that slide would probably not be a very good idea. Now, anyone who's ever played around with these things, hold on, my camera is sliding around. I have my camera stand that I have, well, my camera stand's a piece of wood I have nailed to this tree. It has just eroded over the years, and as a result, my camera likes to slowly etch its way to the edge of that stand. But let's see, what was I just talking about? Anyone who's ever played around with these things can tell that whenever they load a magazine and load a round into the chamber, that slide moves a lot slower than it does whenever you just drop it forward. That does not always matter with stuff like what I'm using here. However, it can matter with some stuff out there. So for the people that argue and try to tell me, man, I can't remember where this hits. I think it's hitting low. Maybe not. But for the people that argue and tell me you should not do that with your handgun, yeah, I will acknowledge that it absolutely could potentially damage the handgun, but I'm way less concerned about it on something like this than I would be on something that has been customized. There we go. Wow, this hits way lower than I remember. Okay, alright, this seems to hit like 6 inches low. I don't remember that being the case, but apparently I was wrong. Now you'll notice I just dropped this thing, and I did that intentionally and purposefully because, like I said, I'm not really concerned about dropping the slide on something like this. If I had something like, what's a good example? Like a Makarov, something that is just a straight blowback system whose triggers tend to not be that great, you shouldn't feel bad about dropping the slide on something like that either. It doesn't have a locking system to get peened, and the trigger job on those have just plenty of sear engagements, and you don't have to worry about any of that surface area malforming itself to ruin your trigger, because your trigger is already terrible. So don't worry about messing it up even further. Alright folks, thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Kind of a short-ish video today, but I still wanted to go ahead and point this one out because I get comments like that. Like, I get regular comments like that talking about dropping the slide on handguns. And there are some times where you definitely do not want to do that. I will full on say they are 100% correct. If you're going to tell me not to drop the slide on a handgun, you are correct whenever you say it could potentially damage that handgun. It's simply not designed to be able to handle the momentum that it gets whenever it's not stripping around from a magazine and loading it into the chamber. But I do a lot of things with a lot of equipment that the equipment is simply not designed for it. If you have something, you know, for example, something like this, something military surplus, and this military surplus firearm, this tool that was used for country defense, cannot handle simply having the slide dropped down then it probably is not a very durable firearm and should not be used for a country's defense. However, if you have some kind of custom match style half-pound trigger firearm, that's not something that you would want to use for a country's defense. That's the reason, that's one of the reasons why military firearms tend to not have half-pound triggers. It's just not something that you would want for a military force. These systems are simply different than systems like that, and as a result, you can get away with running these a lot rougher than you normally would with something of the nature of something customized, something a little bit more delicate. Did I already do the outro? I can't remember. So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, description below, link to all sorts of stuff. Go check that out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I see some brass on the ground. I'm actually gonna gather that up. That's from me shooting 45 ACP earlier today. And I don't want to lose that brass because it is reloadable. I'll see y'all on the next video. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.